and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Caligeris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, I'm extremely excited to have on the President of ProductCamp Austin. And I'm just going to stop for 1 second and say, if you've not been to a product camp, you totally should. Generally on Saturdays, have them in a lot of the major cities, unconference, which means it's topics sort of that the audience wants to hear. You vote on them, right? So it's like super relevant, super interesting, and a lot of really good, passionate product people. So that's my little pitch for product camps. But he's the president of ProductCamp Austin. He is a two-time founder, startup leader, product ops kind of expert, and is going to bring a really great perspective to the conversation. So please welcome Arturo Piña. Welcome, Arturo.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's awesome to be here. Excited to have a productive and good conversation about products.
Excellent. So you are the founder of Startup Agency, which kind of provides fractional product management support to startups who have a ton of startup experience. So I definitely think it's going to be a really interesting conversation talking about the differences and similarities of product management in sort of larger enterprise organizations and versus startups, and sort of the lessons that we could apply to each other, like things that are more common in one that we could apply to the other, I think would be really great. But before we dig in there, I always like to ask everybody their origin story, right? Like, how did you get where you are today, and how is this sort of startup product management your superpower?
Yeah, no, that's I love starting there because, it was kind of by not accidental, but it was just opportunistic, right? It was at a point in time where I just knew that I wanted to sort of try something new. Was looking into startups, was talking to a bunch of them, just being in Austin and sort of connected to that community. And eventually got the opportunity to join, some pretty early startups with a more sort of like open-ended role, right? It was kind of like operations. It was kind of like product. It was very much just like, look, we have a lot to build. We have a lot of problems to solve. We have a lot of big plans, and we just need people that are sort of generalists, but also like can focus when they need to, and just kind of go take it off, just kind of go off with it. So really started more on like a kind of operational sort of role, like, okay, what are we doing? How do we kind of do that? So it was more like process driven. But as we were building technology and, different software, it was also like, okay, well, how do we also like help ourselves with better tools? It was just like, but that first one was just operationally heavy SaaS company. So like naturally we just had to build more technology to kind of help us as well. So really my role like started with, okay, how do we do it? And then how do we productize it? And then the more I did that, the more I kind of started leaning more towards the product side of things and kind of becoming more, I guess, product specialized, even though I've always enjoyed kind of having that broader range and that broader focus on the impact of product across organizations, which will be great topic in the difference between, small and big. But that's really kind of how I got into products. It was just by need to sort of build more to help us in operations, and then just getting a little bit closer and closer to like what you would expect as a traditional product manager.
So one of the things that we often hear about startups is that they don't really have a product management function, right? That it is founder-led. They had a problem, so they started a company and they kind of owned that problem in market space. And the product really comes in at a growth aspect, right? When we're trying to scale either larger or beyond that first product. Is that true, or is that a lie we have been told, sir?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is true. I think every company is different, especially in a startup world. And I think even as the bigger you get, I think product management is still ill-defined across different industries and different companies at different sizes. But you are correct in the sense that the founder leads the product, right? The founder leads the vision, like whatever that company does in an early stage is coming from that founder's mind and direction. So they are the product leader. I do think there is a good space, or like there's enough space at the table for sort of product management in a smaller company, especially when you start sort of raising a little bit more money. If we get into sort of the details of startup world, right? If you're a CEO or a founder and you're raising money, that sort of becomes your full-time job to just go talk to people, sort of sell, right? You're selling the pitch, the company, you got to raise money. And naturally, you don't have as much sort of flexibility and time to really focus on the product. So, I mean, that's a very fine line that needs to be threaded. And it's important to sort of have that continued sort of push and vision on the product side. So that's where I think, if it's like 10 people, sure, the founder's probably going to be leading it.
Yep.
If it starts getting a bit bigger than that, dozens of people, I think there's a good spot for product management there. And it would be wise to have, a strong product person that's still a bit of a generalist, but somebody that can kind of carry that vision on behalf of the founder or with the founder, so it doesn't kind of fall behind as you raise money.
No, that makes sense. And I think a couple of things that come to mind. I think on a startup, the product and the company are often the same, if that's right. They're very connected. You get a larger company, you could have different divisions, different groups, different whole bunch of other things where a product does not necessarily equate the same. But I also think that true in a startup or any small company, that generalist approach is necessary and it's powerful and it's quite fun, right? When you're doing it. But you can't be like, no, I'm over here in my ivory tower. I will only do that. There's no room for that in this world.
For sure. And I mean, just kind of expanding on that, right? With the different product lines as you continue to grow, when you're early, you can kind of build a bunch and you're not quite into like maintenance mode yet, right? So I think a lot of bigger folks, that have been in bigger corporations, maintenance is actually a big lift, just keeping something online and,
sure.
Et cetera, et cetera. So when you're early, you can kind of get away with doing everything and not really having to pay too much attention to that thing you built 6 months ago or whatever. But when you're much bigger, that's a tough balancing act between sort of legacy code, as I would call it, and like your new feature, your new exciting stuff that you might be pushing for.
Oh, that's very true too. I mean, even the amount of customers you would have in a larger organization who have then a bigger pull on your resources, right? And you're a bigger say in your backlog when you have, that can be a very different look. On the other hand, when you have a startup, sometimes you have a handful of customers that are very, very important, right? Because they're all of them. So I imagine there's balances on both sides.
No doubt about it.
All right, let's talk through some of the big areas of product and kind of compare and contrast the startup world versus sort of the larger enterprise piece. And I don't know where to start. There's so many good options. Let's start sort of with what we already kind of talked about, the generalist piece. Is there a different reporting structure that you see often in the startups that you work with in terms of where product sits in the organization?
Yeah. And I think maybe more so like instead of report, well, yeah, I guess it can fall under reporting structure, but I almost think of it as like directional, right? So as we talked about earlier, it was when you're sort of in an earlier stage, you're kind of a little more independent and you're kind of just leading that strategy where you kind of report obviously up to like the founder, right? Who's maybe just directly above you if we look at an org chart. And then in a bigger setting, right, in a bigger company, I actually think there's a lot more sort of reporting sideways or like horizontally. Literally, yes, your manager might be sort of in an org chart above you, but when you really talk about like who do you like report to and have to like convince and sort of work with and like make sure that you're sort of aligned with to progress the product forward, I think it's usually kind of more like sideways, right? So that's when you get into more of like that stakeholder management where like, because I honestly, in my experience, like it was working with sales, like that was almost more important than like working with my boss in the bigger corporate setting, because if I don't have that good relationship with them, or if I don't have a good rapport with them, even though we might not be sort of, colleagues and they might not like sign off on my bonus, it was still very important to have that rapport and have that alignment so that I could do what I wanted to do or what I thought was best for the product. Does that make sense? Is that kind of?
It does. And I would think even like one of the differences isn't just like the reporting structure and the sideways, it is probably the formality and intentionality that's required for that kind of communication in an enterprise versus the startup, which is often a very tight group of people who are all being generalists across sides and are very, like there's a lot of communication that happens while we're working versus like, oh, now I got to do the status reports or this. Because like everyone's in the boat at the same time. So I imagine that not only is there a different version of it, but or the different people, but also just how you do it is a bit different.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And maybe even more like, analysis and like actual reporting, right? Like at the output of reporting versus just kind of conversations and on the fly alignment where we might have talked about it this morning. And then at night we're executing in an early startup. On the other hand, it might be like, okay, well, I'll have something for you, within the next 2 weeks to back up sort of this data and this decision making. And then we can sort of go into execution mode. So yeah, even from like literally output from a reporting standpoint, significantly different.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit about sales. So let's talk about go-to-market, like when you go-to-market activities and support when you're in startup mode. And I am sure this depends a little bit on the level of startup we're at. But talk a little bit about your role when you work with organizations and the product function, how you support the sort of go-to-market function.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in the stage, it's all about growth. Everybody should always keep an eye on churn and make sure that, you have a healthy business. I think fundamentally, like when I think of product, I always like to have a big lens on the business, right? I don't just think sort of software and developers. I do like to think, okay, is this product going to make money? Is there a return on it?
It's important.
It's important, right? You need to have a viable business. Yeah. But earlier on, it is more focused on just growth. So like it could be more of just like, okay, what's going to convert quicker? We can kind of take a little bit more risk, kind of figure out what it kind of looks like down the road. I mentioned, how do you support it? That's a whole nother conversation. But like the go-to-market strategy is just about like what's quickest, like what's the best thing that we can do in the shortest amount of time to essentially get us the most sales. And to me, that's just like really that's the goal, right? Keep the other things kind of back of your head, as I mentioned, churn, but it's all about the numbers going up and then managing it from there.
So yeah, there's probably, let's talk about speed, right? Speed of movement, speed of change, both to sort of plan and direction and the product itself. Yeah.
I mean, you kind of touched on this earlier, right? Like you might have a couple of customers that keep the lights on. I think fundamentally in a startup, you kind of have people on your bench too, like your customers are kind of on your bench, right? Like they know they're kind of taking maybe a little bit of a risk by using your product as an early company, but they believe in the mission. For startup people listening, if you're not sort of selling your product like that, like you are a stakeholder, my customer is a stakeholder and influencing the future of my product, that usually leads to a better relationship. And when you drop the ball, because usually in a startup, you might drop the ball a couple of times, it's less likely that they'll leave. So the speed of execution, like you can take a lot more risk because you kind of have those people close to you, the customers that are very close to you. As you mentioned earlier, when you're a little bit bigger, and as I kind of just alluded to, churn is a bigger topic, right? The risk of losing somebody that, might be a massive client with a big contract, because you did this tiny little thing that had a little bit of downtime, just to get like a specific example, that could cause a big storm. A lot of people are going to get angry. A lot of people are going to get involved. And in reality, that's like, the opposite of what I mentioned earlier. It's a bit more transactional in my opinion. So if it's bad enough, somebody might just be like, I've had it. I'm gonna go to your competitor. So the speed of execution really comes down to like that risk sort of aversion. In the startup world, you can move a lot quicker. You might drop the ball. You can also revert back. You can, kind of manage it if it doesn't go as planned, because you take this risk by moving faster. On the other side, I think you do have to be a little bit more analytical, a little bit more careful, because the impact could be, pretty big if you move too fast.
It's an interesting approach, though, from a startup perspective, to really bring your customers onboarded as stakeholders so that they feel the excitement of the improvements and how their feedback will help. But also, to your point, then they understand that they're part of this amazing experiment, and maybe are a little bit more understanding.
Yeah.
From a startup perspective, I have worked at various companies. I have worked at startups where I always say it was my least favorite job because I was in marketing. I've had other startups that I liked, and I was selling vaporware, and it drove me nutty because it changed all the time, and there wasn't ever anything, right? We were still in the idea stage, but it has scarred me. And how do you find that balance in startup where you want to be responsive and you want to be able to move quick, but you don't want it to feel like you're ricocheting for either internally with the people who work there or for your customers, that you're just constantly shifting visions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. If I have to like really sort of pinpoint it to like, how do you, I don't know, manage that or kind of avoid selling vaporware? This might be like sound a little fluffy or a little bit like too generic, but I really think it comes down to sort of that leadership, right? So a lot of startup people might recognize like the word North Star, right? Like what are you sort of going towards? What's your guiding sort of light? If everybody's sort of really, really aligned, like if everybody fundamentally believes that where that's headed, like where the company's headed, why we're doing this, how we're selling it, why we're selling it, then I think you can stay away or have a better chance of staying away from this like selling vaporware. I think it's natural for sales organizations to oversell, no matter how big or small you are.
Oh yeah,
that's just part of the
that
game,
happened
right?
plenty in enterprise customers too.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's easy to do that as humans, but I think to your point of it changes too often, or you kind of like ricochet it like from wall to wall. If the alignment is there and like it's strong, right? Like we know where we're headed, and we know that North Star or this metric is what's going to drive this business forward. I think that is how you kind of stay within the boundaries or the lines, and not every week is a new thing. Does it happen? Yes, it will continue to happen, right? Maybe just not as often.
It's also part of the fun,
maybe a couple of months, but hopefully not every week where everybody's just, okay, what's next? So switch gears and
that makes a lot of sense. We're having a really clear understanding for everyone of the problems we're solving, the personas, the positioning is really key, because there's not that level of gravitational pull that we have in an established organization where there's all of these guardrails sort of in place just naturally that keep us all going in one direction. And that's part of the beauty of the startup, right? That if everybody has that clear view of where we're going, everyone in that organization is empowered to think about the best way to get there, and to not just think about it, but to act on it, right?
Yeah.
But that communication piece has got to be very clear.
Yeah. And to get more tactical versus sort of theoretical, like I think it's that North Star should be a metric, so it's a metric that defines the business in its entirety, in the sense of like, this is what we build and like why we build it. It benefits the customer. Like it's got to be very succinct, right? It's like one short sentence or like a couple of words, but it needs to have that impact where it's like, if we go towards that, the customer will be happy. If we go towards that, product knows what to do, right? If we go towards that, sales knows how to sell it. If we go towards that, marketing knows how to word it, how to brand it. So it's a difficult task. Like it sounds, simple. It's just this one thing. But once you nail it, I think you do get that really good alignment across the org.
So I know part of what you do at the startup agency is kind of go into different, well, tell me, I don't have to tell you, you know what you do. Tell me, tell the listeners.
Yeah. Well, it's that the reason for starting this sort of fractional agency is because of what I've learned and also what I enjoy to do, which it's not so much like, it's not this beautiful little package that you sort of buy and then you get this nice little output that is like a PRD or like one tangible thing. Is that part of it? Definitely, right? Like everybody needs sort of deliverables and tangible things. But really what I enjoy doing, what I'm happy doing, and what I think is most valuable is in an early stage is sort of that, look, we're going to look at everything across the board. And collectively, I'm going to help you sort of go in that right direction. And that can be through like hands-on, like call it like product management. Like we're going to roll up our sleeves and figure out who we're doing this for, what we're selling, how we're selling it. Or it could be sort of more strategic, kind of like behind the scenes, working on vision, kind of like at a higher level, sort of strategic coaching, or just like a second brain to kind of help founding teams get in that direction. So it's a little bit of both, because that's I think where the value is. And selfishly, that's what I enjoy doing. I don't like just talking, I like also doing.
No, I love, that's the best part, right? Is kind of digging into the business in the beginning and helping them. And I find when I work with founders and smaller organizations that are growing, they often know a lot of the stuff that the North Star stuff, but it's not articulated.
Exactly.
Right? So it's not that they haven't done the research. It just sort of all sits somewhere in everyone's head. And so really helping them like formalize it is too strong a word, but get it out in a way that the rest of the organization, especially as they scale, knows where to point is, I think, a very exciting place to be.
Yeah. I almost think of it as like a thought partner, right? That's a little bit harder to quantify and like justify, charging X many dollars for it. But in reality, like, and that's why I love this sort of getting back into in person. And we see that a lot with the nonprofit, with ProductCamp, where we're getting more and more people to join us, because it's just that sort of in-person thought process or thought partners who just get more out of each other. Like there's magic in that. So, whether personal or virtual, I think, just talking and getting it out there is just it's a much better way to do that.
So when you drop in and some of these startups and some places you've worked before, I would imagine that you were often the first product person. Is there understanding what your role is? Is there alignment that you're needed? Or is there a bit of a sales job that you need to come in to help explain what you're going to do and why it's an important step in a process that for some people seem to be working fine?
Yeah, I mean, there's I think a bit of both. There might be like expectations of what currently is believed is what's needed. I think it's just like, any good product manager, whenever you do like customer interviews, you sort of get a little bit deeper into what they might be saying. We can't just take everything at face value to understand the problems that we need to solve. Like it's not just that button or the color, is like more than that. You know what I mean? So I think it's the same thing for anything that I've done and worked with before and will work with in the future. It's like, okay, well, we have this idea, but now let's really get to sort of the deeper parts of the business and like understand, okay, if it's growth, like what will enable that, right? If it's efficiency, what will enable that? So I think it's important to take it all in, but also reshape it after understanding it and sort of like rephrase it into what's realistic, given what I can do, right? Because I'm also not a one-stop solution for all the problems, but it's putting my lens on it to kind of come together, set the right expectations, and then be able to go to execute. That expectations is really what it all comes down to. If you have this idea and I have this idea and then we go execute, like it's going to be a pretty bad experience and then probably going to get fired pretty quickly after that.
And I actually think that same like alignment on expectations is important for product people of all size organizations, because it is not a very consistently performed or defined role, even within one organization. So again, I'm going to bring what I think I'm going to do, and I've got my partners here who are expecting something else. And then again, best intentions, I do the best thing. It's still not meeting their expectations. So that role of alignment that you so clearly do because it's new there is also, I think, that same approach people should be taking anytime they're in a new role. Anytime someone new joins the ecosystem of their new role. So you get a new stakeholder, a new head of sales, right? It's another time to do that alignment up front so that everyone, again, is going in the same direction.
100%. Like I think adaptability is one of those like qualities that we need as product managers. Like there's a lot of maybe skills that we can like go into, right? And like there's a lot of technical things that we can get into, and like, but there's I think from a product management standpoint, at least in my opinion, there's a lot of these more human characteristics that we need to be like super conscious of. Adaptability, just exactly like you said, is being one of the most important ones for me, because things grow. And with this whole conversation of starting in a startup and then going corporate, I think you hear a lot of people like you can't do both, or like if I even take a bigger sort of stance on this, like you might see in a startup, even founders get let go or later in the stages because they bring in a more professional CEO, right? But that adaptability, I think, is just key to like continue to sort of grow as your product grows, as your organization grows, as strategy shifts. Is like adaptability, I think, is probably top three. One of the things that I think a good PM needs to have like locked in.
Yeah. Are there processes or systems that you lean into consistently? Like, again, the product function doesn't exist, let me build you one. Are there like, okay, these are the three, whether it's artifacts or meeting types or programs or systems that you do? Or is it really like, let's see where you are. Let me start where you are and figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, I like some of the most basic ones. I think also every team works differently, right? So like a very structured sort of agile development, refinement meetings and all that, like that doesn't work for everybody, right? For some teams, it's phenomenal. I think if you're in a remote setting, it can help even better. If you're in person, maybe you don't need as much structure. So it really depends on not even just the company size, but I think the people around you and the people that you're working with. But I think some of the fundamentals that I do like to just do, and like even for my personal life and everything, right, is just how do I make decisions better, faster, like smoother, with more confident. So I always use that. I always forget the name of it. I think it's the Eisenhower matrix or the quadrant, right? Which is like low effort, high ROI, like, the quadrants. We can,
Yep.
I don't know if you can do like something to share with the people. Maybe we can post the link. But that, like, to me, that's a fundamental, right? Because then that helps me also get alignment on decision making. If it's low effort, higher ROI, or like customer value, that's the first thing we kind of work on. If we all agree on that, there's no debate. You know what I mean? So it just saves a lot of time.
And it's so simple, right? It's so clean.
So
it's not like, yeah.
Yeah, we're not getting into points. We're not getting, it's just like, is it this, or that? And that's it.
And it's comparison study, right? So it's not like a precision thing, like, well, I think it should be right here, but it's like comparatively to the other items we could do.
Yeah.
Where are we going to get the bang for our buck?
Exactly. So little things like that, I think are important, again, just to be more efficient and get more into doing instead of talking.
So one of the other things that you talked about is investors. Now, obviously, large organizations have investors and shareholders. I think the closeness of the investors to the business and to the team and to the day-to-day activities directed to tying investment is a lot closer in a startup. And so I would be curious as to how you see product's role in supporting sort of the investment thesis programs and kind of your experience with the investors.
Yeah. Actually, I might take the opposite approach to this one. Earlier on, and currently venturing more into venture capital. So this is very fresh in my mind. But earlier on, I'm going to kind of switch gears with like who I am, right? I'm going to put the cap on as like thinking more as an angel investor. Like you sort of invest more in the people, right? Earlier on versus maybe a business. Like things change. We talked about this a lot earlier, right? And you might pivot. So I think it's really like, honestly, earlier on, it's more about people and teams versus like as a business or a product and like the code that is coming out tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And then in big organizations, one actual like hands-on experience was we were kind of heading towards acquisition, and we had a strategic partnership, and there was like an integration associated with it. So like literally the product that I was building was going straight up to the board meetings on a weekly basis, and I had to present updates on that product because it was all sort of connected into this big acquisition that was happening, et cetera, et cetera. So not to get into too many of the details, like that was the closest that I was like as a PM, like executing, like literally like talking to engineers and then going to investors in a boardroom. And that was at a much larger company, right?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean,
it's very valid.
And that's my personal experience, right? Like you could have a very loud investor as an early stage company that says, this is what you need to do. They might be right, they might be wrong. But in my opinion, it's usually more, like it's people. I trust you, I can help you. But you just kind of do your thing earlier on.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great way of looking at it. You mentioned that adaptability was one of 3 things that you think product managers should really have. So now everyone listening is like, is she going to ask what the other 2 are? I will. Yes. What are the other 2 like must-have traits that you think of from a product?
Yeah. I should have thought about that before I told you 3.
It was very precise too. I was like, can't have 4 now.
now it's on the fly. I mean, honestly, like I think different product roles, different organizations demand different skill sets. So I think when you sort of connect your like hard skills, like again, whether you're good at SQL or like you might be good at this or that, like more technical sort of abilities, like that is very dependent on the company type, right? If it's like a DevOps company and like super technical backend stuff, like you probably need to be a pretty technical PM. If it's sort of on the opposite side where it's more like consumer driven, like you might just need to be, I don't know, maybe even better at design or like I honestly think PM can be so broad and that's why I love it. That's why I got into it because I like to do a lot of things, learn a lot of things. But I say that to kind of focus more on like, again, the human sort of components of it. Adaptability is one of them. I think the other one is like I used to call myself like the cheerleader in my last role. I was leading, a small org, like product org. And what I found got the most out of my teams was just becoming like a really good cheerleader. So just sort of encouraging and like sort of pushing my teams to come in and like get the work done, right? Like get them like really into like our refinement sessions and like get it to like really understand, the customer point of view. So really just becoming more of like the voice and like the cheerleader and like, guys, this is what we're doing it. Like, this is, like literally it was completely different than something I've done before, which is more like hands-on sort of execution. So that really just taught me like the bigger you get, I think it becomes more sort of human. Like you need to really work on those soft skills. The hard skills will help you, but like the soft skills, I think like just makes a huge difference. I think that's how you kind of elevate into more senior sort of roles in the PM world.
It's rarely like how beautiful written your requirements are. And it's much more how you're able to inspire your team and engage the others. Because it's not just bringing in the voice of the customer, right? It is making people care about that voice and be interested in it.
Yeah. And maybe the last one, just to not only do soft skills, right? I mentioned kind of SQL and stuff earlier, but I think having some sort of analytical sort of mindset can help too, right? Because at the end of the day, how do you make decisions? You need to be able to sort of know why you're making decisions. I do think there's analysis paralysis. There's maybe too much that can be done. And data might never be like 100%. Some gut will always, in my opinion, have a say. But just being able to, put something together to sort of justify your gut or, understand what people are saying and kind of make your own assumptions. I think that's going to be important. And that can take many different like directions, right? It could be like very technical, like you're doing queries, or it could be like Excel, or it could be customer interviews, right? Which again, I think that's a specific, not everybody loves doing or can do a good customer interview. But being able to analyze and sort of quantify your decision-making is going to be important.
So if you were, since you've worked on all size companies, if you were talking to a product manager who works currently at an enterprise organization, one of our listeners, let's say, and they were thinking about joining a startup, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely different. It's basically structure versus no structure, right? The one thing that I sort of really like think about when it comes to the two is like, do you need sort of the guidance and maybe mentorship and sort of the rails to continue like pushing this one thing forward, being more efficient, kind of making it better? Or are you able to just like come into work and like really not know what tomorrow or today is going to be like, and like figure it out, right? Because that's the bottom. Like we have the direction, as we talked about earlier. Like if you have good leadership, you know where you're going. But you know where you're going, you don't necessarily know like what the next step is exactly. So to me, that's the biggest thing. You have to be like ready to just rock and roll. Like you're going to have to, you don't know what's next. You just have to go explore, figure it out, look around, click around, talk around, like whatever, to be able to make some decisions. And it's like 100% you versus in the big space, you might have colleagues in sales, marketing, et cetera, that will have great opinions that are very valid and you should consume to make your own assumptions. So that's the biggest thing. Just be ready to have, you don't really know what the next step is. And that's what's expected. You got to figure it out.
And what about the vice versa? So you have someone who's been a product manager in startups for a long time, and they are looking at a job at a larger enterprise organization. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much what I went through, right? If your personality is like mine and you get bored by doing the same thing for a long time, like be ready for that mentally. But I also believe, we kind of, I'm going to get sort of philosophical here. Like we control our own destiny, right? We kind of create our own path. So I think even if you decide to go into that next level, I think, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, like how can you sort of take one from the other and like make it better? I think you're going to have to learn how to manage stakeholders and sort of work with a lot more people to get things moving forward. But I think you can use a lot of things you learned earlier on to just kind of like be a little bit louder, be a little bit more sort of driven. And I think that also pays, because now you have more confidence, you can make a bigger impact, and that should ideally reward you in your career path. So I think, it's much different. It's going to be a lot slower. But I think bringing that sort of startup energy to kind of get back to startup mode, a lot of companies would appreciate and benefit from.
All right. We talked about lots of different things today. If you were going to have listeners do 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would that be?
I'm going to go easy. Talk to your customers. Get out of your head. You know what I mean? Like, we're all guilty of this. Like, even the best of the best, we think we know, but just get out there and talk to people. Like, just get out there and talk to people. Never stop talking to people. Doesn't matter how big you are. Doesn't matter how small your product focus might be or how big it might be. Just go talk to people. Don't only rely on, heat maps and analytics. Those are great. Use those. But like, honestly, when you can, talk to people. That's going to get you a lot closer and make you a lot better.
Absolutely. And that includes, of course, talking to people at your local product camp.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Arturo, this was great. Thank you so much for coming on. If people want to learn more from you, if they want to find you, where should they go?
Yeah, it should be on LinkedIn. So at Arturo Piña is my name. I don't know my URL, to be honest. I think it's Arturo Piña 1. But find me on there. I'm super accessible. There's a little trick that if you just expand my bio, you can actually find a Calendly link. So I'm always available. I love talking to everybody. I live what I talk about, right? It gets me closer to startups, other businesses, and just keeping up with what everybody's doing. So we'd love to chat with all of you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great chatting with you.
All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.